cops humiliated her in public, but one call to her son changed everything. She was just shopping for Sunday dinner. Eleanor Davis, 78 years old, stood near the bananas at an upscale grocery store in a quiet, wealthy neighborhood. She wore a pearl necklace, a gift from her former students. Her posture was proud, calm. She moved slowly but with dignity, like someone who had spent a lifetime teaching others how to stand tall. That's when the two officers saw her. They didn't see a teacher. They didn't see a grandmother. They saw someone they thought didn't belong. They humiliated her, right there in public, in front of customers, in front of the store manager, and in front of a boy who happened to be filming. They grabbed her, pushed her, handcuffed her. For what? For shopping while being old and black? She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't fight back. But she did make one phone call. And that one phone call would change everything. Eleanor had arrived at the market just 20 minutes earlier, parking near the front entrance and carefully locking her car. She had a short list: sweet potatoes, kale, and her favorite kind of tea. As she moved through the clean, polished aisles, she noticed the glances. People looked at her like she was out of place, like her presence didn't match the soft music and fancy prices. She ignored them. She'd taught hundreds of children in this city. Some of their parents probably walked past her now pretending not to recognize her. That was fine. Eleanor had long learned to carry herself without needing anyone's approval. But two officers near the entrance didn't just glance. One of them whispered, "You see her? She doesn't look like she shops." "Here." The other replied, "Let's check it out." Their boots echoed down the aisles as they made their way toward her. Eleanor looked up from the bananas, sensing something was wrong. The taller one spoke first, voice fake polite. "Ma'am, we've had reports of suspicious behavior." Eleanor frowned. "I'm just shopping, officer." "Do you shop here often?" the younger one asked, eyes narrow. "I go where I want," she said, her teacher voice showing. "And this store carries what I need." Before she could say more, the manager appeared. He looked nervous. "She's been wandering for nearly an hour," he claimed, even though she had only been inside for 20 minutes. "Some customers are uncomfortable." "That's a lie," Eleanor said, gripping her purse. "I have my parking receipt right here." "Let's see your ID," the older officer interrupted. As Eleanor reached into her bag, the taller officer grabbed her arm, hard. She stumbled, knocking over a display of oranges. Then came the shout, "Stop resisting!" "I'm not," she tried to say, but the other officer had already pulled her arms behind her back. The cuffs clicked, tight. At the front of the store, a young man, maybe 19, was filming on his phone. His hands shook, but he kept recording. The older officer saw him. "Delete it. Now." "I know my rights," the boy said, voice quiet but firm. The officer yanked the phone, twisted his arm until he dropped it, and shoved the phone back into his hand. "Delete it, or you're coming with her." The boy hesitated and deleted the video. Eleanor saw all of it. Her wrists hurt, but she held her head high. The manager began barking orders to clean up the fallen fruit, acting like that was the biggest mess in the room. "I want to speak to your supervisor," Eleanor said, loud and clear. "Lady, you're lucky we don't charge you with assault," one of the officers said with a cruel laugh. They walked her out of the store. Outside, the sun was golden and the sidewalks were quiet. No one came to help. No one even looked up. People had already moved on. But Eleanor hadn't. As they placed her in the back of the patrol car, she noticed something. Both of their body cams were off. She made a mental note of it. Just like she used to memorize the names of every child in her class, she was now memorizing everything. Their names, their badges, the streets they turned down. They thought she was just an old lady, just another person they could humiliate. They didn't know her son was watching, and they didn't know who her son was. Not yet. The ride to Precinct 18 took nearly an hour. It should have taken 15, minutes, tops. But the officers kept driving in circles, turning down side streets and alleyways like they were lost, or like they wanted Eleanor to feel lost. She didn't ask questions. She didn't complain. She just watched. She counted the turns, memorized the street names, noted the sound the car made every time they rolled over a pothole or sped over a bump too quickly. They thought she was sitting, quietly, confused. But Eleanor Davis had spent over 40 years teaching children how to pay attention. She knew when someone was trying to distract her, and she knew how to keep her mind sharp, even when everything else was spinning. When they finally arrived, the precinct looked more like a warehouse than a police station. The paint was peeling, the windows were dirty. The lights inside flickered with a low buzz, like an old school building no one cared about anymore. Inside, no one greeted them. No one asked questions. No one raised an eyebrow at the two officers bringing in a 78-year-old woman in cuffs. That told her everything. They were used to this. The older officer, Mitchell, she had learned from his badge, filled out the report like he was writing a grocery list. He laughed while he did it, shaking his head like she was some kind of joke. Subject became aggressive when approached, tried to run, refused to show ID, he said aloud as he typed. Eleanor sat straight in the plastic chair, her wrists still cuffed behind her, her head high, her voice calm. "That's not true," she said. "None of that happened." Mitchell didn't look up. "You keep talking. We'll add more to the report. Disturbing the peace. Threats to an officer. We got room." The other officer, Harris, was younger. His hands shook a little when he pressed her fingers onto the fingerprint scanner. Not because he was nervous, but because he was too rough. Her wrists were red now, swollen. They took her mugshot next, a cold flash. Her expression didn't change. She refused to look weak. After the photos and prints, they walked her down a long hallway. The walls were gray, no windows, no clocks, no mirrors, just flickering lights and faded posters no one read. When they opened the holding cell door, the smell hit her first. Cold metal, old sweat, disinfectant. The cell had one metal bench bolted to the wall and a toilet in the corner. No privacy, no kindness. The door shut behind her with a heavy bang. No one told her how long she'd be there. She sat down slowly. Her knees ached, but she didn't let it show. She looked straight ahead. She kept her breathing steady. She waited. For hours, nothing happened. Officers walked by. Some looked at her with boredom, some with irritation. Others didn't look at her at all. But she listened. They weren't careful about what they said. They weren't quiet. They had no idea who was sitting behind those bars. She heard jokes about planted evidence, about people being taken care of, about body cam footage going missing and helpful, judges who didn't ask too many questions. "You hear about the old lady?" one officer said near the break room. "She knocked over a whole display trying to swing at Mitch." "That's not what happened," another replied. "Doesn't matter. Mitch already wrote it up." "Parker's backing it?" "Of course. We got leverage on him from that shoplifting case last year." Eleanor said nothing, but she heard everything. They weren't even hiding it. And that's what made it worse. They were so comfortable, so confident, so sure that nothing would happen to them. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know that her son had built his entire career around one thing: fighting injustice. They didn't know that the woman they threw in a cell had raised the U.S. Attorney General and taught him how to fight with words, not fists. And they certainly didn't know that Eleanor Davis wasn't just sitting there waiting for her release. She was taking notes. She was building a case. One word, one voice, one officer at a time. She watched which rooms officers entered and exited. She watched how evidence boxes were carried to certain offices but never returned. She watched two officers switch name tags before signing paperwork. And she waited. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for help. She just waited for the right moment. Because she knew that when the phone call finally came, the call they had no idea was coming. It wouldn't just bring her freedom, it would bring the whole system crashing down. The ride to Precinct 18 took nearly an hour. It should have taken 15 minutes, tops. But the officers kept driving in circles, turning down side streets and alleyways like they were lost, or like they wanted Eleanor to feel lost. She didn't ask questions. She didn't complain. She just watched. She counted the turns, memorized the street names, noted the sound the car made every time they rolled over a pothole or sped over a bump too quickly. They thought she was sitting quietly, confused. But Eleanor Davis had spent over 40 years teaching children how to pay attention. She knew when someone was trying to distract her, and she knew how to keep her mind sharp, even when everything else was spinning. When they finally arrived, the precinct looked more like a warehouse than a police station. The paint was peeling, the windows were dirty. The lights inside flickered with a low buzz, like an old school building no one cared about anymore. Inside, no one greeted them. No one asked questions. No one raised an eyebrow at the two officers bringing in a 78-year-old woman in cuffs. That told her everything. They were used to this. The older officer, Mitchell, she had learned from his badge, filled out the report like he was writing a grocery list. He laughed while he did it, shaking his head like she was some kind of joke. Subject became aggressive when approached, tried to run, refused to show ID. He said aloud as he typed. Eleanor sat straight in the plastic chair, her wrists still cuffed behind her head high, her voice calm. "That's not true," she said. "None of that happened." Mitchell didn't look up. "You keep talking. We'll add more to the report." Disturbing the peace. Threats to an officer. We got room. The other officer, Harris, was younger. His hands shook a little when he pressed her fingers onto the fingerprint scanner. Not because he was nervous, but because he was too rough. Her wrists were red now, swollen. They took her mugshot next. A cold flash. Her expression didn't change. She refused to look weak. After the photos and prints, they walked her down. A long hallway. The walls were gray. No windows, no clocks, no mirrors. Just flickering lights and faded posters no one read. When they opened the holding cell door, the smell hit her first. Cold metal, old sweat, disinfectant. The cell had one metal bench bolted to the wall and a toilet in the corner. No privacy, no kindness. The door shut behind her with a heavy bang. No one told her how long she'd be there. She sat down slowly. Her knees ached, but she didn't let it show. She looked straight ahead. She kept her breathing steady. She waited. For hours, nothing happened. Officers walked by. Some looked at her with boredom, some with irritation. Others didn't look at her at all. But she listened. They weren't careful about what they said. They weren't quiet. They had no idea who was sitting behind those bars. She heard jokes about planted evidence, about people being taken care of, about body cam footage going missing and helpful, judges who didn't ask too many questions. "You hear about the old lady?" one officer said near the break room. "She knocked over a whole display trying to swing at Mitch." "That's not what happened," another replied. "Doesn't matter. Mitch already wrote it up." "Parker's backing it?" "Of course. We got leverage on him from that shoplifting case last year." Eleanor said nothing, but she heard everything. They weren't even hiding it. And that's what made it worse. They were so comfortable, so confident, so sure that nothing would happen to them. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know that her son had built his entire career around one thing: fighting injustice. They didn't know that the woman they threw in a cell had raised the U.S. Attorney General and taught him how to fight with words, not fists. And they certainly didn't know that Eleanor Davis wasn't just sitting there waiting for her release. She was taking notes. She was building a case. One word, one voice, one officer at a time. She watched which rooms officers entered and exited. She watched how evidence boxes were carried to certain offices but never returned. She watched 2 officers switch name tags before signing paperwork, and she waited. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for help. She just waited for the right moment, because she knew that when the phone call finally came, the call they had, no idea was coming. It wouldn't just bring her freedom, it would bring the whole system crashing down. The hours passed slowly inside that cold cell. Eleanor had no clock, but her body knew. Her knees were stiff, her back ached. The air was dry, and the light overhead buzzed without mercy. Still, she sat tall, silent, waiting. She wasn't a stranger to waiting. As a teacher, she'd waited for students to grow, for parents to show up, for boards to fund schools that deserved more. But this was a different kind of waiting. This was war in slow motion. Footsteps came and went. Officers walked by without glancing. Some laughed from the hallway. One brought her a paper cup of water and left it on the floor without a word. She didn't touch it. No one mentioned a phone call. By the next morning, the energy in the precinct began to shift. The day shift arrived with coffee cups and half-zipped jackets. New conversations filled the hall. Eleanor closed her eyes, but she wasn't asleep. She was listening. The mayor's office already called about the arrest. Does she have a lawyer? No call made. Chief said delay it until we clean the file. Smart. She'll be out before lunch. We just need the manager to sign off on the witness report. Eleanor opened her eyes slowly. Her heart beat steady. They were planning it, shaping the truth before it ever reached the outside. But they were wrong about one thing. She was going to make a call, and she knew exactly who to call. That moment came when a face appeared outside her cell that didn't match the others. It was a woman. Dark curls pulled back, badge clipped to her belt. Her steps were slower. More careful. She paused outside Eleanor's cell and looked inside. Really looked. You all right, ma'am? The woman asked quietly. Eleanor studied her. She didn't recognize her from the booking, didn't remember hearing her voice in the halls. I've been here since yesterday afternoon, Eleanor replied. No phone call, no water I trust, and no idea what they've told you people. The officer hesitated. Her name tag read Carter. Did they say what you're charged with? Carter asked. Eleanor shook her head once. They're still writing the story. Carter looked down the hallway, then leaned closer to the bars. I'm not supposed to do this, she whispered, but I know something's not right here. She pulled a phone from her coat and slid it through the bars. You have 1 minute. Eleanor didn't waste time. She tapped a number by memory, no hesitation. It rang once, twice, a third time. Mom? His voice was sharp, alert. I'm okay, Eleanor said quickly. But you need to listen. I'm at Precinct 18. There was a pause. You're where? They think I'm nobody, she said. They don't know who I am, and they don't know who you are. His tone shifted. Tell me everything. Eleanor, even now, was calm and direct. I've seen forged reports. They're hiding body cam footage. I overheard talk about bribed judges. Officers joked about planting evidence. They're covering everything as we speak. Are you hurt? No, she said. But this goes deeper than me. I don't think this is their first time. On the other end, her son was already moving. She could hear papers rustling, people being called, doors opening. I'll send a team, he said. Feds, quietly. We'll build a case first. No headlines, Eleanor agreed. Not yet. She handed the phone back just as hurried voices came down the hallway. Carter slipped the phone back into her jacket and stepped away just before another officer turned the corner. What are you doing down here? He barked. Welfare check, Carter said coolly. Protocol. The man grunted and moved on. Eleanor leaned back on the bench, calm once again. It had started. Somewhere, miles away in Washington, her son, the U.S. Attorney General, was assembling his team. Not a press release, not a warning, but a real investigation. Silent, precise. The storm wasn't at the door yet, but it was coming. Meanwhile, inside Precinct 18, the officers still moved with that same careless swagger. They thought they'd buried the story. They thought Eleanor Davis would vanish quietly. They didn't know that the person they'd locked up had just unlocked the biggest mistake of their careers. Detective Carter walked back to her desk. Her heart was pounding. She opened her drawer, reached beneath a false bottom, and pulled out a flash drive. She'd been saving things. Whispers she overheard, files she copied, footage she wasn't supposed to see. She hadn't known what to do with it before, but now she did. As the morning sunlight cut through the narrow windows of the precinct, Eleanor Davis sat calmly in her cell, a faint smile on her lips. She'd waited 18 hours for that one phone call. Now the countdown had begun. Not for her release, but for the truth to come crashing down. By noon, the building began to hum with something new. Fear hadn't hit yet, but it was close. Eleanor could feel it in the way the officers moved, just a little quicker, just a little more careful. Some stopped laughing when they passed her. Cell. Others glanced over their shoulders before speaking. She didn't say a word, but she watched everything. From her corner, she saw files being carried into rooms that were always locked before. Boxes labeled evidence passed through one door, then came out with different labels, or none at all. Computers were being used non-stop, printers running hot. The air smelled like sweat and cheap coffee. Eleanor's eyes stayed sharp. Her mind stayed clearer than it had in years. She heard them talking in low voices about tightening up the reports. One officer asked quietly, "You sure she didn't hear anything last night?" "Even if she did," someone replied. "What's she gonna do? It's her word against ours." Another said, "Chief wants this whole thing cleaned up before the mayor calls again." Still, they didn't know. Didn't know she had already called. Didn't know that her son, Malcolm Davis, had launched something silent but powerful from his D.C. office just hours ago. They didn't know that a small, focused team of federal investigators were already pulling financial records, reviewing complaint histories, and comparing body cam logs. They didn't know that everything was being watched now, by people who couldn't be bought or scared. But someone inside did know something was wrong. Lisa Carter hadn't slept. Her head throbbed from the pressure of it all. She'd spent the last 4 years in this precinct, keeping quiet, keeping low, collecting everything she couldn't stop, but couldn't unsee either. Late that afternoon, she sat alone at her desk, staring at her screen. Her thumb rubbed the edge of the USB drive in her coat pocket. She didn't need more proof. She had it. She had enough recordings, printouts, emails, and altered reports to bury this place. But she hadn't known what to do with it. Not until she met Eleanor Davis. That woman, calm, still, and fierce even behind bars, had said more with one look than Lisa had heard in months. Now Lisa knew it was time. She pulled out her phone and texted the number she'd been given by Malcolm's staff, an encrypted line. No names, no questions, just files. Within minutes, the USB was uploaded, and she was told to stay quiet. Federal. Agents were moving in soon, but they needed to finish watching the building first, needed to let the rot show itself fully. "Be patient," the agent messaged. "Don't interfere. Keep your cover." Lisa swallowed hard. She could do that. She had done it for years. Meanwhile, Eleanor's cell remained quiet, but her mind didn't rest. A young officer passed by her cell and paused. New face, nervous eyes. "Do you need water?" he asked. She looked at him, then nodded once. "Thank you." He left and came back with a sealed bottle, set it down gently by the bars. "Did you really do what they said?" Eleanor looked him straight in the eyes. "No." He nodded, quiet. "I didn't think so." He walked away. That was the first crack. An hour later, 2 officers argued, near the vending machines. "You really think she doesn't know who her son is?" "I don't care who he is. We follow orders." "Yeah, well, orders change when the feds show up." "You're paranoid." "No, I'm smart." Then came the silence, the kind that always means a shift is coming. The precinct phones stopped ringing. Computer monitors froze. One printer jammed, another just shut off. Then the front desk officer stood up, confused. All the internet just went out. At first, no one cared, until someone checked their phone. No service. No signal. That's when a detective near the back door opened it and saw the black SUV idling across the street. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. No expressions, no visible weapons. Just quiet. Too quiet. He shut the door fast. "Something's happening," he muttered. Back in her cell, Eleanor straightened her back slightly. She couldn't hear the conversations, but she could feel the change. Precinct 18 wasn't just rotting from the inside anymore. It was starting to smell from the outside, too. The first real panic came when Chief Callahan's voice echoed down the hallway. Loud, sharp. "Where's Mitchell? Where's the updated file on the Davis woman? Where's the footage? Did someone check the store's cameras?" "We already wiped them, sir," came a voice. "Body cams?" "Battery failure. Same excuse." Callahan slammed a door hard, enough that even Eleanor jumped. "We need to get her out of here. Transfer her tonight. Lose her in the system." Lisa Carter heard those words from the hallway and felt her stomach drop. She texted one line. "They're planning to move her. Tonight, emergency." At the federal office, the reply was immediate. "Do not interfere. We're ready. Wait for the signal." Back inside, Eleanor sat quietly. She didn't know every detail, but she knew enough. She could feel it in the way their voices changed, in the new footsteps, in the rising tension. They were trying to fix something that had already broken. And Eleanor Davis, 78 years old, wearing the same clothes she'd been arrested in, sat behind cold steel bars, knowing exactly what was coming. She didn't have to fight. She just had to wait. The storm was now on their doorstep. The sun had already dipped low in the sky when the doors to Precinct 18 swung open for the last time as a free place. Nobody screamed. Nobody sounded the alarm. It didn't happen like in the movies. Instead, it happened like truth always does. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. 3 unmarked black vehicles rolled up to the entrance. The engines didn't turn off. The doors opened in perfect rhythm. Out stepped men and women in dark suits, their badges gleaming under the fading daylight. Behind them, uniformed federal marshals followed, calm, focused, and very, very serious. Inside, Chief Callahan had just finished barking orders. He was in the middle of telling 2 officers to clean the records, hide the transfers, get Eleanor out of here before the city finds out, when the front desk officer stood up with a strange look on his face. Chief?" he said. "You might want to come see this." "What now?" Callahan snapped, storming toward the front. That's when he saw them. Federal agents, dozens, and walking at the front of them, Malcolm Davis, the U.S. Attorney General himself. Callahan's face went pale. In the holding cell, Eleanor Davis was sitting straight as ever. She didn't blink. She didn't move. But her lips parted just slightly. She smiled. Everything after that happened fast. "Federal agents," one of the marshals called out. "No one leaves the building. No one uses a phone. All hands up where we can see them." Officers froze. Some went for their radios, dead signal. Some reached for drawers, locked. Some just stood there, trying to act like they didn't understand what was happening. But they did. They all did. The building, which had once buzzed with the kind of power only unaccountable people feel, now pulsed with fear. Chief Callahan stepped forward, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is highly irregular." Malcolm Davis didn't even stop walking. "You can save your speech for court," he said coldly, "where you'll be explaining a lot more than just one false arrest." Marshals moved past them in waves. One group headed for the records room, another for the evidence lockers, a third toward the server room. Every hallway filled with footsteps. Every drawer was opened, photographed, sealed. Every hard drive was copied. Nothing was safe anymore. Eleanor heard the keys jingle. Then her cell door swung open. The man who unlocked it wasn't Mitchell, or Harris, or any of the officers who had shoved her into the back of a squad car the day before. It was a federal marshal in a dark blue uniform, his eyes steady. "Mrs. Davis," he said, voice respectful, "we're here to escort you out." She stood, brushing off the wrinkles in her skirt. The cuffs were gone, her hands were free. But her memory, still full. As she walked down the hallway, she passed officers lined up against the walls, some in handcuffs, some just frozen in place. She saw Mitchell being held face down on the floor, his hands zip-tied behind his back. His face was red with shock and fear. She walked right past him. He didn't say a word. Neither did she. Lisa Carter met her by the door. Her eyes were glassy, full of unspoken words. "I'm glad you made the call," Lisa whispered. "You helped make it matter," Eleanor replied. Outside, news cameras were already setting up. Word had spread fast. A handful of reporters shouted questions, but the agents kept a tight perimeter. Eleanor was guided to a waiting black SUV, and standing next to it, her son, Malcolm. He was usually calm, composed, known for his sharp words and even sharper suits. But now, as he saw his mother walk toward him, he broke form. He ran, and he hugged her like a child who had nearly lost the most important person in the world. "I'm all right," Eleanor said softly. "No, you're not," he replied. "But you will be." He helped her into the SUV. She sat back, finally allowed to exhale, but she wasn't tired. Not yet. "We're just getting started," she told him. He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. As the SUV pulled away, she looked back at the building, now crawling with agents and reporters, the same building where she had been treated like nothing. Now it was ground zero for a case that would shake the entire city. From the front seat, Malcolm turned toward her. "Your statement," he said, "whenever you're ready." Eleanor sat up straight. "I remember everything," she said. And she did. Every face, every name, every word. Because while they had spent 24 hours trying to cover up their crimes, she had spent 24 hours documenting the truth. And now, that truth was finally free. "You said..." By the time night fell, Precinct 18 was no longer just a police station. It was a crime scene. Outside, camera flashes lit up the building like a stage. Inside, every drawer, locker, and hard drive was being searched, sealed, and removed by federal agents. Reporters called it the biggest law enforcement takedown in state history. But to Eleanor Davis, it was something simpler. It was the end of a lie, and the start of the truth. She sat quietly inside the federal building now, not far from where her son was reviewing the evidence in a separate room. Her hands rested gently on the table. A fresh cup of tea sat untouched beside her. Her eyes stayed forward. She was ready. A young federal agent entered and sat across from her. He looked respectful, but nervous. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we just want to confirm what you saw and what you heard." Eleanor nodded. "I remember it all." And for the next 3 hours she spoke. Not with anger, not with fear, but with the clarity of someone who had lived a long time. And, seen more than most people would believe, she gave names, times, words they thought she couldn't hear, jokes they made when they thought she was just another tired old woman with no one to call. She described how Mitchell falsified the report, how Harris smirked when the cameras were, accidentally, turned off. How Chief Callahan made late-night calls to clean up the arrest, and how, in the middle of all of it, officers laughed about making sure it all looked routine. The agent across from her wrote every word down. Outside that room, Malcolm Davis stood in front of a large screen filled with maps, phone records, bank transfers, and a growing web of red lines connecting dozens of names: judges, city officials, high-ranking officers, business owners. "This isn't just one bad precinct," his team lead said. "It's a network, and Precinct 18 was the center of it." Lisa Carter's evidence, carefully saved for years, had been the key. Her hidden audio files included conversations between officers joking about how to frame suspects. Her screenshots showed court orders being edited after approval. One video clip even caught an officer bragging about how easy it was to make evidence vanish. But most damning of all was a single conversation recorded just 2 weeks earlier. It was Callahan and Judge Whitaker. Callahan: "We'll need that parking ticket wiped too. The girl's family's got a lawyer now." Whitaker: "Send me her address. We'll add something to the record. Simple mental health claim. No judge questions that." The room had gone silent when the clip was played. That wasn't police work. That was corruption in its purest form. Malcolm didn't speak for several seconds. Then, "Get the warrants. All of them. No delays. We go wide tonight." Across town, the mayor sat at a long table in a private restaurant with 2 wealthy donors and his personal attorney. He sipped his wine slowly, pretending the news reports weren't bothering him. "They have nothing," he muttered. "Just noise. Media drama." His phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. Then it started ringing nonstop. He stared at it, then picked it up. His face dropped. He stood too quickly, knocking over his glass. "What is it?" one of the donors asked. "Federal agents are outside," the mayor said, voice trembling. "They're here for my files." At that same moment, Judge Whitaker was being pulled from his home in handcuffs. And inside the evidence room at Precinct 18, agents uncovered a hidden drawer behind a loose wall panel. Inside, dozens of envelopes. Cash, unfiled reports, photos, notes, old court stamps. One envelope was marked, "Davis, Archive." They opened it. It was the original store footage of Eleanor's arrest. The file officers claimed had been lost. It showed the truth, clear as day. No resistance, no aggression, just a woman picking up bananas and being thrown to the ground. The video was burned onto 5 separate drives and copied to federal servers. That same night, news anchors around the country ran the story. New evidence emerges in Eleanor Davis arrest. Federal Sayer. Sweep uncovers shocking system of police corruption. People sat up, paid attention. This wasn't just about an old woman and some bad officers. This was about a city where justice had been sold, and how one person stood quietly in the middle of it, watching, remembering, and refusing to be erased. In the early hours of the next morning, Malcolm walked into his mother's room. She was still awake, looking out the window. "They tried to move you," he said, "late last night, their last trick. But they didn't know you'd already moved the entire system under their feet." Eleanor looked up. "They thought silence was safety," she replied. "But silence is where truth waits, and truth doesn't stay still forever." Malcolm smiled faintly. "The mayor, the judge, Callahan, they're all in custody now." Eleanor looked out the window again. The sun was just starting to rise. "Good," she said. "Now let's get the rest of them." The sun rose slowly over the city, casting golden light over buildings that had once hidden darkness. Precinct 18 was now sealed with yellow tape. Its windows were covered, its doors locked from the outside. What was once a fortress for the powerful had become a silent monument to everything that went wrong, and in its place, something new was beginning. At the Federal Building, Eleanor Davis stood quietly beside her son. She wore a simple navy coat. The same pearl necklace that had slipped sideways during her arrest now sat proudly on her collarbone. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't angry. She was ready. In the press room just down, the hall, cameras buzzed. Microphones lined the stage. Journalists waited, not just to report, but to witness something rare. Truth. Malcolm Davis took the stage first. He didn't open with numbers. He didn't open with titles. He opened with his mother. 1 year ago, she sat in a jail cell. He said, voice calm but firm. No one asked who she was. No one cared what she had seen. But because she stayed silent and watched, today, over 60 arrests have been made, including high-ranking officers, judges, and a sitting mayor. He paused. Eleanor Davis is my mother, but today she is also the teacher of this entire city. The room stood in applause when Eleanor stepped forward. She didn't read from a paper. She didn't prepare a speech. She spoke plainly, the way she did in every classroom for 4 decades. They thought I didn't see, she began. They thought I didn't matter. But I was watching, and now you are too. That's how change begins. Back home, the neighborhood was different. The grocery store where it all started now had a new manager, a woman whose first decision was to remove the private security firm tied to Precinct 18. A mural had been painted across the brick wall beside the parking lot. It showed Eleanor standing tall, one hand at her side, the other resting on a notebook. Above her, the words read, "I saw, I remembered, I spoke." Jordan Carter, the young man who had recorded the first footage, now worked as a journalist. His articles on police misconduct had helped free 2 falsely imprisoned men. One of them hugged him outside the courthouse and whispered, "You saved my life." Jordan always shook his head. "No," he would say. "Mrs. Davis did." Detective Lisa Carter had left the precinct months ago, but she hadn't left the fight. She now ran a statewide police integrity division. Her team, made up of former investigators, auditors, and community leaders, visited precincts without notice. Body cams were no longer optional. Complaints were no longer misplaced. Officers now answered to something higher than a badge. Lisa kept one thing from her old life, Eleanor's mugshot, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. "That's the day everything changed," she would say. Inside City Hall, new leaders had taken office. Every policy was reviewed. Every contract investigated. Mayor Kensington had been sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. Judge Whitaker, life without parole. Chief Callahan, 40 years, and not a single word of apology. But justice didn't stop with punishment. The city used recovered funds, over $120 million from seized accounts, to repair what had been broken. New schools were built in neglected neighborhoods. Community centers opened in former police properties. A grant program was created to fund training for ethical policing. They called it the Davis Reform Plan. One evening, Eleanor sat quietly on her porch. Malcolm was with her, a cup of tea in each of their hands. He had been offered a cabinet position in Washington, maybe even a seat on the Supreme Court. But he hadn't said yes to any of it yet. "They want me to lead from the top," he said. Eleanor looked at him over her cup. "But, do they see the ground?" she asked. He smiled. "That's why I haven't left yet." They sat in silence for a while. Then Eleanor asked, "Do you think they've really changed?" Malcolm took a long breath. Some have. Some are trying. And the rest? Well, now they know someone's watching. She nodded slowly. Then the work was worth it. On the 1-year anniversary of her arrest, Eleanor returned to the courthouse. Not in handcuffs, but as the guest of honor. She was presented with a National Civil Rights Award. As she stood before a crowd of students, activists, lawmakers, and ordinary people, she held up her hand to quiet the applause. "I don't want you to remember what they did to me," she said. "I want you to remember what you can do. When you see something wrong, when you know something isn't fair, and when the world tells you to stay silent, speak anyway." And with that, Eleanor Davis stepped off the stage. She wasn't just a retired teacher anymore. She was a witness. She was a warrior. She was the storm they didn't see coming. And she had left behind more than evidence. She had left behind a blueprint for how to turn silence into strength, injustice into action, and fear into change. And though the world would keep spinning, Eleanor had already shifted something inside it, forever.